and graduate programs. I should have said graduate students. And so this session, ultimately I can show you a lot of things that I've prepared, but I think maybe what makes the most sense is if I ask everyone, what is the things that are on your mind? What troubles you when you think about doing research at the graduate level? What gives you pause, makes you uneasy? And then we could just answer those questions and we'll probably cover the same thing that I had prepared. So if you would, take just a couple minutes and write in the chats box, and hopefully you all see the chat option. What gives you the most concern, pause, what makes you the most uncomfortable about doing research at the graduate level? All right, take a few minutes, record those. Got one, how to find scholarly sources. When the item's not available in the library and the box comes up to request a copy, how do I do that? Yes, so the old interlibrary loan. Definitely talk about that. Where should I start? Fair enough. Give everybody just a minute more. And obviously, as we go through this, if you have questions, be sure to just ask them. You can throw them in the chat and we'll get to them then. It could be that you're feeling pretty confident right at the jump. How to narrow searches without eliminating search sources. There are lots of ways to narrow your search. We can certainly explore those, both in terms of how we search and then some of the limits that are built into some of the collections and databases. See, when I complete a search and no response is provided on the topic, how to break it down to find what I'm looking for. Yeah, we can talk about that too. There are ways of reconceptualizing a topic, but certainly there are also instances where something hasn't been recorded or explored in the scholarly literature. And then what do you do? Well, we'll talk about that. That's citation tracing. All right. If you are still working on it, please continue and submit it, and we'll get to it. So let's cover some of these basic ones. How do you start, right? So many of you will find yourself at the library's homepage, and you can get there about 18 different ways. Off the university's, any of the university pages, you'll see a link for Steely Library up at the top. You can obviously Google Steely Library, it's going to take you here. Or one trick is, this is not the real URL, but if you type in library.nku.edu, it'll throw you there. So that's how you get to us. Um, Getting started, it can be difficult. But what we've done is we've provided research guides for the various disciplines that are taught here. And those research guides will have databases or collections listed. There are organized in two categories. One will be the ones that we think are the primary sources that you should look at and consult, and then there'll also be secondary ones. So how do you get there? So off the library's homepage, and I should point out, you're going to see this Google-like screen on the library's homepage, and you're going to say, yeah, I want articles, and you're going to start conducting your research. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, but I will bring up that what we've done with this search is try to put the majority of our collection into a single search. And because we have so many different collections that have a variety of things that are scholarly, like scholarly peer-reviewed sources, but we also have things like newspapers and magazines and trade publications, which have value, don't get me wrong, but are not necessarily scholarly. You might end up with a big old result list filled with things that you can't use. You can limit it to peer-reviewed, but then again, I will say that the functionality, the ways to limit your results to something that is customized to your need is the functionality is just not there. So yes, you will see this. Um, it is our Google-like experience. Go ahead and mess around with it, but I always say that it's a bit like drinking from a fire hose. So what should you do instead? Right beneath this box is a link for the research guides. So if we click here, and let's say we were interested in education, just as an example, there is a research guide that was created for education. So here we see those core databases, the ones that we would recommend you consult first, and then additional peripheral or related databases. Unfortunately, this is arranged alphabetically as opposed to by order of preference or by the order that we would recommend you look through first. For those of you that are in education, ERIC is probably the best place to start because it is put out by the Department of Education, as an just as an example, covers everything from pre-K up through university education literature. It's not to say that these are not valuable, because they certainly are. And as a graduate student, it is probably a good idea to run searches in multiple collections just to make sure that there are no biases or that a collection might not be as large as or as comprehensive as you need it to be. And certainly when you do that, you're going to find that there's considerable overlap between the databases. You shouldn't be surprised when you see something in ERIC and you also find it in Education Resource Complete. So how do you get started, right? So best idea is look at the research guides and try to figure out which database is most relevant. We're working to get this changed so that our preferences are up at the top and it goes in descending order. But you would arrive at, let's say, ERIC, and you're presented with a search option, a search screen, actually. You may notice right off the bat that there are some functions that are available to you. And now, as if you were undergrads, you can probably live and die just on the basic search. But as graduate students, I would encourage you to be in the habit of looking at that advanced screen because it's going to tell you everything that the database can do, right? So we still have the search boxes, but you may notice that there are limits that could be useful to you. One to point out initially is peer reviewed. So if you would just like to look at the results on a given topic that are from peer reviewed sources, you simply click that link and you don't, or box, and you don't have to worry about whether or not something that you're looking at, if it's peer reviewed or not. Another common limit that you might want to examine and use is the date of publication. So let's say you were interested in the best practices for educating children with attention deficit disorder. You probably don't want to look at the literature from 1965, just as an example. Uh, but by limiting by the date, you can look at the more recent things. Now, granted, if you were looking for an historical context on that particular topic, you might not want to use that date limit. But for a lot of topics and a lot of disciplines, specifically health and medicine, you're generally wanting to focus on the more recent results. And again, instead of wading through a bunch of stuff you can't use, specify what years you can. Here's some more limits that are likely useful to you. Let's say that you are really just wanting to look at early childhood education or elementary, secondary education, or if you go even further down, you have the specific grade levels. So let's say you're studying a particular intervention on fourth graders. There's a way that you can limit the results just to the literature that is tailored towards the fourth grade subject matter, right? Intended audiences. Again, there are wonderful ways that you can help limit your results uh, to what exactly you need. So language is another one that you might like to look at. And this is just Eric. So just to move to a different database entirely, just to show you that these do change, we'll go back to the research guides and we will go into, let's go into psychology, for instance, right? So we go down, psychology research guide. The best database to start in psychology would be PsycInfo. It's put out by the APA. It's the most comprehensive psychology database. And again, if we start at the basic search, we're not going to see all the functionality that's available to us. But if we go under advanced search, we see some of the same types of limits that are available, but we see other ones that are more tailored towards the psychological literature, right? If you wanted to look at a specific methodology, for instance, like your professor says to you, you need to find a qualitative article on your topic. You can scroll down and there is a limit for qualitative studies. Or if your professor requires you to do quantitative studies, again, you can find that. There's probably, surprise, there's not one for mixed methods. But again, if you explore these advanced search options, you're going to see a lot of the tools that will probably help speed up your work and make it easier. You may not want to read every language, and probably can't read every language that has published something on your particular topic. Again, you can specify that you want to just work with English. And if we go into a database like CINAHL, for those of you that are in nursing and allied health, again, you're going to see limits on that advanced search that will be beneficial to you, help you limit those results. So again, that's the discussion about, or I think it kind of addresses how to limit your results. But let's talk about getting started. How is it that you figure out what's out there on a topic? So normally, most people will go to the search box and they will type in words that they know, right? Because you have a concept in mind, but in order to find information on that, you have to type in words, right? So let's do, let's say, okay, how about depression? And so let's see how many results we get, and I'm sure it's going to be a bazillion. It's 390,000, right? Way too many for normal mortal humans to look through in a reasonable time period. So other ways that you can help narrow your results besides the limits that we saw on those advanced screens. And I also point out that you'll see some of those limits reappear on the left-hand side of most of our databases. For instance, if you don't want to look at an article from 1632 about depression, you could change that to be a little bit more current. But you can also add additional words. So let's say we were interested in depression. Let's say we were interested in migrant children, right? So I'm going to show you, we'll go type in migrant children, right? And that 390,000 shrinks down to something much smaller and something much more manageable, 232,000, right? Not 232,000, 232, my bad. Once you get here, this starts to look like something that a normal human could review, right? You could do this in a couple hours, not a couple weeks like the other. And I generally recommend graduate students that if you have fewer than 20 or 10 results, you're likely being too specific. And if you have more than 500, give or take 100, you're being too broad. And as you might imagine, if we add additional terms, this will shrink. So let's say we were looking at, let's say, Hispanic migrant children and depression, right? The more terms we add, you can see that it shrinks our results. And it is possible if we load up this with search terms. Let's see, we're going to say male, right? That seems reasonable. Keeps shrinking and shrinking. And if we load it up even further, I'm trying to think of another term I could add in here. I mean, eventually you'll zero this out, right? And if you find that you've got too few, you need to remove some of the terms. Because what it's doing when we run our search is it's looking for each of those words somewhere either in the record that describes the article, or if the full text is available, these words appear in the full text. Let me show you some tricks. So now we've seen how we limit, and obviously if we remove words, it broadens it out. So one trick you should be aware of is something called phrase searching. If you have a concept that has multiple words but mean one thing, in this instance, migrant children, right? You throw it in quotation marks. And what that does is it forces the search to look for those words that are within the quotation marks in that order and sitting right next to each other. So without quotation marks, we were looking at how many results? Was it 232? It was. If we throw it in quotation marks, it has to find those words sitting right next to each other. And as a result, you end up limiting and focusing the results into something where we see migrant children sitting right next to each other in the first example. In the second example, we see migrant children sitting right next to each other. So that is one trick. When you have a concept that goes by multiple words, right? United States of America, bipolar disorder, myocardial infarction, all those different concepts that have multiple words that essentially mean one thing, go ahead and throw that in quotes. All right, so those are some of the strategies that I would recommend for narrowing your results. Look at how your search is built. Think in terms of ways of being more specific, particularly if you've got more than 500 results. Add additional terms to that. but don't add so many that you're only looking at 3 or 4 different results. And then also examine that advanced search. So here's our search, just as an example. If we just look at the peer-reviewed in English, because that's the only language that I feel comfortable in reading scholarly literature in, and let's say sources from the last 10 years. So let's say 2013 to 2023. We're able to limit that even further. Excuse me. So limiting is a combination of your search strategy and then the limits that are built into the database. All right. So starting, you use your own words, the words that you know and are common. And that's a great way to begin. But one thing you have to be mindful of as graduate students is whether or not you're using the terminology that your peers in the field are using. And it's sort of an exercise of knowing what you don't know, right? So really quickly, do any of you know the technical terms for, everybody knows what a heart attack is, but does anybody know what the technical term for heart attack is? You can either say it or type it in the chat. Infarction, yeah. Myocardial infarction, yep, very good. I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. What about cardiac arrest? That's a technical term to mean a heart attack, right? So which term should you use? Probably not heart attack. What about people between the ages of 13 and 18? What do we call those people? Type that in. Teenagers, very good. Teens, right? What else? Minors, yep, sure enough. What else? Adolescents, yeah. So which of those terms should you search when you're trying to find information on them, right? That's what is kind of tricky about doing research, is anticipating what language the author has used. Our stuff, and by stuff I mean our collections and our searches, are not smart like Google. Google is fairly clever. It knows that when you search for adolescents or teenagers, they roughly mean the same thing. And if the author of the work used one term versus another, it doesn't matter. Google's smart, has a little bit of AI on the back end, gives you both because it knows that those words are synonymous. Our stuff is dead literal. So when you run your searches, whatever you type in is what it pulls up. It's not smart. It doesn't know that myocardial infarction is the same thing as heart attack. And when you run a search for heart attack, it's just looking for those words, heart attack, either in the record or in the full text. So as graduate students, I think it's important that you know that a lot of databases will have something called a thesaurus. And of course, everybody knows what a thesaurus, a common thesaurus is. It's where you look up a word you know and you see all the synonyms related to that particular word, right? A thesaurus or thesauri in a database is a little bit different in that it helps you figure out what the preferred terms are. In this case, in APA PsycInfo, the thesaurus is up in the top left. That's usually where you're going to see the link. And it's a bit like asking the database, like, hey, what's the preferred language? So let's say you were interested in manic depression. You type that in. And the source says, hey, We prefer bipolar disorder. That's the terminology that you should use. And then you can run your search based on that recommendation. Bipolar disorder, add. Of course, it throws in some extra stuff. But any article that has the descriptor or the subject heading of bipolar disorder will now pull. That will include those older articles that don't use the phrase bipolar disorder, but rather use the phrase manic depression. So as graduate students, I would encourage you, if a thesaurus is available in your database, to use that, because that's probably the best way that you're going to be comprehensive in your searching. So let's look at teenagers, right? Is that the preferred term? And interestingly, maybe I should have said teenager. Nope, it's only pointing us to adolescent pregnancy and adolescent mothers. Let's see if I type in teens. I would have thought adolescence would have popped right up, but it did not. Let's see what happens if I type in adolescence. Nope, there isn't a heading for adolescence. How about that? That's sort of a surprise. But what is really, really handy, besides it telling you what language that you probably should run your searches to be comprehensive, it also will tell you how concepts are related to other concepts. So let's say that we were interested in youth suicide, which is a pleasant topic for certain. But we'll see that once we click on that, and this is true for most of the thesauri, it'll tell you what they mean by a particular concept, right? Give you scope notes or definition. And it'll also tell you other terms and concepts that are related to that, either as a broader concept, and this, if you found that you had fewer results, a broader option might be helpful, or sometimes it'll show you related or narrow results that might also be useful. So again, these are ways that you can kind of figure out what you don't know, what language you probably or should be using. Alternatively, if you in a database that doesn't have a thesauri, there's no shame in running searches using the language you know, right? Right, so that's the language I know. And I'm going to throw it in quotes because I know it is a three-word concept. And there's no shame in looking at the results that you have and mining them for terminology, right? That's another strategy. Again, if you don't have access to a thesaurus, or thesaurus seems too nerdy for you, throw in the words you know, and then look at the results that you are presented with and look at what words other authors have used. Also, you'll see in the subjects, which are the same things that we were seeing in the thesauri, bipolar disorder is probably the better route. So you can mind the results for better language and then rerun your searches. All right. So I think we covered the basics of narrowing and focusing your results, particularly if you have too many, and how to get started. And admittedly, I kind of blurred those two questions into one demonstration, but I think it sort of makes sense. Um, let's look at some of the other questions. So scholarly sources. I think we sort of covered that as well. You go into those research guides and see which databases are recommended. If you're still a little unsure of whether or not you're looking at scholarly material, most of our databases will have that peer-reviewed limit. Click on that and that'll filter that out. Now, having said that, know that some journals that are scholarly and peer-reviewed will have editorials or may have letters to the editors or book reviews or commentaries. So you not necessarily guaranteed to get research articles every time by clicking that peer-reviewed limit, but it'll certainly get you into the right journals. And then as you review the results, if you see, some two-pagers and one-pagers, there's a good chance that those are likely those letters to the editor or reviews, things of that nature. Most research articles in most disciplines will be at least 5 pages or longer. All right. So those are the strategies that I would recommend for getting this peer-reviewed literature. All right, I'm looking at the other questions. We did have a question about interlibrary loan, and that's a great question. No library, including us, has everything. And so instead of cursing at us because we don't have it, or changing your topic based on what we do have, I'd like to talk about interlibrary loan. So hopefully all the articles that you will ever need will appear as either PDF, full text, or HTML full text. But sometimes there are things that you would want that we simply don't have. And this, as you look at the screen, you'll see number 2. Let's pretend like this was the best article for you, and we simply don't have it. You're going to see a link that says request through interlibrary loan. You have to log in. You're going to use the same username and password that you use for everything else here at the university. And if I typed it in correctly, let's see if I did. Nope. One more time. All right, I do know my own password. Here we are. If you are able to do that faster than me, you will see that once you log in, a request form is pretty much already filled out for you. It has all the germane information in terms of who wrote the article, what journal it was published in, the dates, the volumes, page numbers, all that fun stuff should be filled out for you in most cases. And then what you simply need to do is tell us when you need it by. And you don't have to specify that if you're open. You need to tell us that you are a graduate student, right? And then you need to tell us what area you're studying in. And not all the areas are listed here. Get the one that's closest. It's just for our internal statistics. So don't worry if it's not perfect. Then you would submit your request, and usually within 2 to 3 working days, we're going to get that article for you for free. We will send you an email. The email will have a link to the full text and a little security code that you can copy and paste. And when you click the link, it'll ask you for the security code, paste it in, and then you're able to download that article or print it, whatever it is that you do with articles. So at any point you find yourself reaching for a wallet to get stuff, put it back, make us buy it. We have a part of our budget that's set aside for this purpose, money that is there for you to use. And we definitely don't want you spending $50 to $100 on articles. Besides articles, if there are books or physical materials that you would want that we don't have, because again, no library has everything, you can request those. The key difference with those is that we have to obviously ship a physical item. Either we'll purchase the item and add it to the collection, and we're waiting on Amazon to deliver it or some other provider, or we're waiting for the library that's going to loan us the item to get it here. And requests that end up going to UC are obviously a lot faster than the ones that are coming from University of California, Los Angeles, just as an example. So the time for delivery of those will vary. But usually within 1 to 2 weeks, we can get things in. And if we buy it, we can get it in fairly quickly. So if there are books or CDs or DVDs that you need, that's the best way to get it. again, we don't want you spending your money if we can get it for you. But in most cases, you do need a little bit of time for delivery. With articles, not very much lead time. For books and other physical materials, a little bit more. Yeah.
Rob, I actually had to use this. I had to use this a few weeks ago. An
How'd it turn out?
article. I got it within 24 hours. It was a PDF, and I was surprised. It was the first time I had used it. Very easy, but it was fast too, which was very helpful because I really wanted to get it read by a certain date. So just it was wonderful. It was a lifesaver. So thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. If they don't have a whole bunch of them in the hopper, they can churn them out really quickly. There's certain times in the year, obviously, where there's a lot of research going on, and then the hopper gets a little full, and it takes them a little time to get through it. But yeah, sometimes there's same day service.
Yeah.
So that's how you get materials that we don't have. And you should see the links for interlibrary loan at any spot where we don't have an item. You can, if you like, navigate to the interlibrary loan system. If you want to put in a request from scratch, you can do that under library services and then interlibrary loan. And it would ask you to log in if you hadn't already logged in. And then you can select what type of material you're requesting. If it's a book, you click that tab, and then you can fill that out or copy and paste that information in to get the request put in. Excuse me, getting over a cold. Let's see, I'm looking through the questions that people put in the chat. How do I maximize my search with different possible databases converge? I think the idea behind that question, and Tina, certainly correct me if I'm misunderstanding it, is are there ways to combine databases and running searches? Um, I would say that if you want that experience, one thing that you might try is using the library's um, discovery search. Let me get to that, which is the one that is on the library's homepage. Oh, sorry, went back too far. But doing an advanced version of that. So if you hit advance, you have the ability to specify which discipline you're focusing in on. And let's say that you were, let's say you were into medicine or nursing. This will pick up things like CINAHL and Medline. I should say that with any kind of combined search that you use, some of the publishers do weird things like not letting the discovery layer see everything or just returning X number of results. So you can do that kind of thing, but I would say that I would still recommend going into sources like CINAHL and Medline individually and running searches, just in case the publisher is doing something, funky on the back end, because we do see that in some instances. This discovery search is an EBSCO product, right? And as you might imagine, content from the EBSCO databases kind of goes higher than the content from their competitors. Yeah, it's pretty shady. So you can use this, and this is a way that you would limit, and you'd obviously want to limit your results to the peer-reviewed sources. And again, there's a link or a box that you can check for that. So that is one strategy. But again, because the publishers don't play nice with each other, it's not a bad way to start, but I would go to those individual databases, later to make sure that there's no funny business going on the back end. I know that's technical and I know that it's unreasonable. We think the same is true. It's really stupid, but it's sort of the competitive environment that we're working within. All right, looking through. Someone asked, and this was a good one too, what happens when you don't find anything, right? Sometimes that happens, and that can be indicative of a couple of things. It could be suggesting that maybe you're not using the language, the best language, the optimal language to get those results. That's one possibility. But there's also the possibility that what you're looking at is new. It's an area that hasn't been studied. So you might say to yourself, well, okay, like, how do I work with that? Like, do I change my topic? Well, not necessarily. So what I want to do is show you a couple sources, actually three sources, one of which I'm sure you're very familiar with, as a way to trace citations. All right, so I'm going to come up with, let's see here. We'll go close this out. The database list is an alphabetical list of all the sources we have. All the ones that you'll see in the research guide, you'll also see listed here, but alphabetically. So I'd like to point out three sources. The one that I think you'll or have used probably most is our good friend Google Scholar. Excuse me. So obviously you can go to Google Scholar directly just by typing in Google Scholar. But if you go through us, if Google Scholar finds content that we have, it will automatically link. So just as an example, let's do myocardial infarction, multiple word concepts. So we throw it in quotes. You'll notice that it recognizes that I'm affiliated, or at least in this case, I'm on NKU's campus, and it's providing links to the full text because we have these collections, not in Google Scholar, but through the databases. If we were at home and not connected, it would say, hey, you want this article? That's great. Give us $40. So I recommend if you use Google Scholar, make sure that you've already logged into a library source, or the best way is just to go in that database list and go into Google Scholar. Now, Google Scholar NKU. For those of you that have used Google Scholar, some of you may or may not have noticed this, but there is, in most cases, a cited by count. So in this particular instance, this article, Acute Myocardial Infarction by H.D. White, has been cited by 915 other sources in Google Scholar. So you can trace what works have followed the work and that have cited it. So if I click this, there's 915 potential articles that are in some form or fashion related, either conceptually or methodologically, to the initial article. So this is a way that you can kind of figure out what's followed an article. Now you might say to yourself, well, that's great, but what preceded it? Does Google Scholar do that? And the answer is no, but we have two sources that do. So I'm going to copy this. Let's make sure it's not a recent, 2019. All right, so reactive oxygen species, ROS-based nanomeds. I have no idea what this article's about, but we're going to use it as an example all the same. We're going to go to database list, and one of our citation tracers is called Scopus, which is a bizarre name, but if you remember mouthwash and citation tracing, as any reasonable person would, that's going to help you remember Scopus, right? So you can throw in a title of an article that you found that you like. So if you find this article, you're like, oh, this is perfect, but I'm just not finding other articles. You use Scopus, you run your search. Hopefully it finds the article, and not everything is there. Oh, that's interesting. A syntax error. Ooh, it may not like this parentheses. It's kind of a big baby with punctuation. Well, it didn't exactly find it, but we're going to use this article. Well, we're going to use, let's say we're going to use an older article as an example. Get to about a number of years ago. All right. So let's pretend that this was the end all be all article for us. We simply can click it. And if we scroll to the bottom, we see the bibliography of the article, right? And it's all clickable. So we don't have to open up, an article and copy and paste or everything in the bibliography that we think might be useful and run searches. It's all assembled here. And then if you were interested in this article or this article or this article, you click the full text finder to see if we have it. And of course, if we don't have it, you do interlibrary loan. So you can trace backwards in time looking at the bibliography that was a part of that article. So if you had the article in your hand, at the back end of it, you would see this as a bibliography. And just like Google Scholar, we see that articles have cited it. So you can trace forward in time. So we could look at a list, and again, a clickable list of all 194 things that have cited this particular work, right? So sometimes when you find maybe one or two articles and you're like, oh, I am stuck. This is miserable. I hate myself for picking this topic. I would say go to a source like Scopus, and I'll also show you Web of Science just momentarily, and see what those works have cited, right? So it may be that, that's new emerging knowledge, and it's a part of existing knowledge that is changing or being reframed or repurposed or reapplied in a new way. And you may not know that until you start digging, right? Or it could be that you're missing something, and other works have cited the article that you think is very useful. And again, you're able to use those as potential sources. So let's do this. We did Scopus again, citations and mouthwash, perfectly reasonable uh, mnemonic device. We go under database list. We're going to go under W for Web of Science. That's, I think, a little bit more descriptive in terms of what's in it and what it does, as opposed to Scopus. It's a little more forgiving with the punctuation than our good friend Scopus. And it would pop up. We are going to run a search for the title of the article at the speed of light. And it should tell us what was in the bibliography of the original article and then what has cited it. And hopefully all the clickable, usable links with it. So we'll throw this in. Oh, it did not like that. So maybe it is also now becoming rather finicky with this punctuation. We'll give it another shot. No, it didn't find it at all. So I'm going to try this. I'm going to shorten it and just use the title and not the title and the subtitle. See if that gets us. Nope, that particular work's not in our good friend Web of Science. So that happens too, because the coverage of Scopus and Web of Science is different. But if we run a search on whatever, just to get something to work with, obviously there are lots of articles about nanoparticles. And if we look at, just as an example, the older ones, it's the same concept, right? This particular article had 19 references in the bibliography, and 10 resources since its publication has cited it. So there are ways to kind of trace the citations to find other related articles. That's not to say that every article is on point, because sometimes we cite articles because of the methodology that was used, but the topic is vastly different. But as the mechanical parts of how the study was done might be relevant as opposed to the content. So you will run into that where some of these things are topically not related to the original article, but the methodology that was used, it does, and it is relevant. So bear that in mind. All right, so that's one way that you can trace citations to kind of figure out um, whether or not you're looking at a hole in the literature or if you're searching it, maybe not using the best terminology. And again, you can mine these results for language to use in your searches. Again, if you don't want to use a thesaurus. All right, so I'm looking through this list of initial questions, and I think we got it. So we're approaching an hour. Has this inspired any other questions? Was I muddy in spots and could use some clarification? Feel free to type it in or speak up. Oh, I got a new message. Thank you, Eileen, or Ellen, I'm sorry. Um, while you're thinking potentially of other questions, I want to show all the different ways that you can get help. They're on the library's homepage. Um, so Kimberly's going to, or Sheena's going to give you my contact information because I work, and I can't remember who, so forgive me, ladies. You can call me, you can email me, and I'd be glad to find a time that works for you. But if you're in a spot where you need something quickly and need help, we have a chat service that's 24/7. Librarians our librarians will man it from 10 to I think it's 4 o'clock, or maybe it's 11 to 4 o'clock. If it's time other than that, it's a librarian at a different institution. They should be able to help out, and they have access to all of our collections. You can give us a call at 572 5456. We'd be glad to help you. You can text message us a question. Usually quick questions are best asked through text. You can email us. You can also schedule an appointment to meet with a librarian if you don't want to meet with me because I'm not available at the time that you need. You simply pick the day, you pick the time, you can pick the librarian that you'd like to work with. You tell us who you are, how to get a hold of you, how you'd like to meet, because we can meet either face to face, over the phone, or through Zoom. You tell us what you're working on, and we will schedule time to sit down with you and not necessarily do all the work for you, but help figure what are the best places to look for your information that'll help you out and the best ways to look for it. But again, I am here and available and willing to work with any graduate students. So you guys are obviously, oh, well, you don't know this, but you're the most fun lot of all students because you're doing hardcore research in most cases. Okay, let's see. Natalie asks if I have a file to send out. Oh, yes. Oh, the area code is 859. And for me, my phone number is 859-572-6658. And I can be reached at Xi R1. That's Z as in zebra, A apple, I igloo, R Robert, 1 at nku.edu. I don't have a specific handout prepared. I do have a flyer that I could send. It's right here actually, and it has some of the key services that I've identified. And this probably looks backwards on your screen, does it? It's not backwards in person, but the key sources that I think you should be aware of. So I'd be glad to share that with Kimberly, and she can share that with the group as well.
And we will post the recording too on our website if you'd like to go back and watch this and see the steps Rob went through again. Oh, you're muted, Rob.
I'm sorry. I coughed and I wanted to spare everybody. Are there any other questions that you have? Because I know we covered a lot of ground in a very short period of time. And it was kind of general too. So I know some of you are doing very specific research, and maybe I can help with some more specific answers. Thank you, Sheena. All right. Well, if things come up that you have questions, and particularly as you start to do this work, let me know. We didn't talk very much about bibliographic management. That might be something that you're interested in. Zotero is a free open source platform where you can place your full text articles as well as all the bibliographic information into your own personal database and store that into the cloud. So in the event that your computer gets blown up, abducted by aliens, you name it, you won't lose all your research. So that's an option for you, and I'd be glad to explain the value of that. There is a learning curve to it. I'm not going to lie, but for those of you doing large projects or projects that will span long periods of time, or if you would just like to load up your own personal collection of articles while you're, connected to the university, Zotero is the way to go. All
Mm.
right. With that, thank you very much, and I hope you all have a good evening, and hopefully you feel comfortable with reaching out to me if you have any questions, and I'd be glad to help you out.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you so, so much.
Any,
Again, I will send out my information in case anybody needs something on the admissions side. I'll send out Rob's information as well as that flyer. Just want to let you all know, give yourself some grace. Grad school's not easy, so make sure that you prioritize rest as well as your assignments. Take care of yourself, and let me know if you need anything at all. I am here for you, and I'm a grad student too, so even if you just need some empathy, I'd be happy to be a shoulder to cry on, just a listening ear. So with that, I will let everybody go. Have a great evening, and thank you again, Rob.
oh, every time, anytime.
All right, see you later.
Take care, everybody.